Along the frozen coasts of Scandinavia and the North Atlantic, the Vikings built their world. Fierce warriors, skilled shipbuilders, and fearless explorers. They carved out settlements in the harshest landscapes imaginable. Their villages dotted fjords, clung to rocky shores, and spread into inland valleys where crops could take root despite the unforgiving climate. Each home was a fortress against the cold, each settlement a symbol of endurance. But among these many thriving communities, there exists one story unlike the rest, a village that simply disappeared. When archaeologists stumbled upon its ruins centuries later, they expected to find a familiar picture of Viking life, fragments of weapons, bones from livestock, and the traces of everyday survival. Instead, what they found only deepened the mystery. Crumbled foundations still marked where longhouses once stood. Abandoned tools lay scattered, as if dropped mid-task. Hearths were still blackened from fire, their ash preserved by time. Yet one detail stood out above all: no human remains. There were no graves hastily dug in the earth, no skeletons hidden beneath collapsed walls, no signs that a final battle had been fought. The village was simply empty, as though its people had walked away and never returned. Even more curious, there was no clear evidence of migration. In Viking society, when communities moved, they often took their valuables, ornaments, weapons, even planks of wood to rebuild elsewhere. But here, so much was left behind: cooking pots, farming tools, everyday objects that no family would abandon lightly. And not a single written record has survived to explain why. So, what could have happened to them? The first theory is famine. Viking settlements often relied on farming and livestock, but when crops failed, survival became uncertain. Their fields of barley and rye were vulnerable to cold snaps, heavy rains, and unexpected frosts. A single ruined harvest could wipe out months of labor and preparation, and without grain, even their animals would starve. At the village site, archaeologists discovered traces of burned grain stored in clay pits and wooden containers. To some, this suggested desperation, an attempt to protect or cook what little food remained. To others, it hinted at tragedy, perhaps fire destroying the last of their precious supplies. Either way, the ashes tell the story of hunger closing in. In the Viking Age, food shortages were not rare. A single poor harvest might be manageable, but 2, 3, or more in succession could be devastating. Families who had endured the long winter with dwindling stores often faced spring with nothing left to eat. Entire communities would be forced to slaughter their livestock early, consume seeds meant for planting, and survive on whatever they could forage from the wilderness. The very rhythm of their survival, planting, harvesting, storing, was broken. Historical records from other settlements speak of these years of famine, when people abandoned their homes, carrying only what they could on their backs or in their longships. Villages became ghostly in a matter of weeks, hearth fires left cold, tools left where they had last been used. The ruins of this mysterious village matched that pattern exactly. Silent, abandoned, as if time itself had stopped. But if famine was the answer, where did the villagers go? Another chilling theory is disease. Throughout history, plagues swept across Europe, sparing no one in their path. From smallpox to leprosy, from dysentery to the great waves of plague that came centuries later, illness has always been a silent killer. And the Vikings, despite their strength and resilience, were not immune. The close quarters of a Viking village made the spread of sickness almost inevitable. Longhouses with their smoky interiors and crowded families provided warmth against the cold, but also created a breeding ground for infection. Shared cups, shared meals, and close sleeping quarters meant that if one person grew ill, many others quickly followed. Some researchers believe that an epidemic could have struck this community swiftly, spreading so fast that panic overtook reason. Families may have fled their homes in desperation, leaving behind their possessions in the hope of escaping the unseen killer. Abandoned tools, half-finished tasks, and the sudden emptiness of the settlement fit this unsettling possibility. Yet here lies the puzzle. In most plague-stricken areas, the earth itself tells the story. Mass graves, hastily dug and shallow, often mark the final resting places of the afflicted. In other cases, bones lie scattered, evidence of families too overwhelmed to bury their dead. But in this village, no such traces exist, no burial pits, no skeletons, no signs of bodies left to decay. It's as if the sick simply vanished into the wind. Could the survivors have carried away their dead in a ritual of cleansing, leaving no remains for archaeologists to find? Or did fear drive them out so suddenly that they abandoned both the dying and the dead? The absence of human remains is not just unusual. It is haunting. If not famine and not plague, then what? The sea, both friend and foe to the Vikings, offers another answer. To them, the ocean was a highway and a hunting ground, the source of wealth and survival. Yet it was also unpredictable, violent, and merciless. Their villages often stood at the edge of fjords or rocky shores, prime locations for fishing, trade, and launching voyages. But these same shores left them vulnerable to the fury of the waves. What if a violent storm, or even a tsunami-like surge, swallowed the settlement whole? Imagine towering walls of water crashing against wooden homes, sweeping away livestock, tools, and families in a single night. To those who survive such devastation, escape may have been the only choice, leaving behind ruins to be reclaimed by the tides. Some evidence points to sudden flooding. Archaeologists uncovered charred beams buried beneath layers of sand, suggesting that a great wave may have pushed seawater and debris deep into the heart of the village. Silt deposits rest where hearthstones once glowed, as if the sea itself had seeped into the very bones of the settlement. These silent clues whisper of disaster, the kind that leaves no time for farewells or preparation. Viking sagas often speak of the sea as a living force, capable of swallowing ships and men without warning. Could this village have been a casualty of that same wrath? The silence of its ruins may be the silence of a people taken by the waters, their voices drowned beneath the crashing surf. If it wasn't the ocean that destroyed the village, could it have been raiders in the night? There's also the specter of violence. Vikings themselves were raiders, but they were not the only ones. Rival clans, foreign invaders, or even mercenaries could have struck under cover of darkness. These attacks were swift and brutal. Ships gliding silently across the water, warriors storming ashore with axes and torches, leaving villages in ruins. It's easy to imagine this mysterious settlement under siege. The sudden sound of war horns in the distance, the pounding of feet on frozen earth, the clash of steel echoing through the night as families tried to flee. If the villagers were captured, enslaved, or driven into exile, their homes would remain as ghostly ruins, abandoned in the wake of terror. History is filled with accounts of such raids. Even Viking villages were not safe from one another. Alliances could shatter, rival clans might seize the opportunity to expand their territory, and outsiders often viewed these northern settlements as targets of wealth. Women and children could be taken as slaves, men slaughtered or forced to fight. To those left behind, silence would be the only legacy. And yet, the ruins of this particular village tell a different story. There are no signs of battle, no broken weapons buried in the soil, no shattered shields discarded in panic, no burned-out homes from pillaging flames. Instead, the emptiness feels deliberate, quiet, almost unnervingly peaceful, as though violence never touched the land at all. So if not famine, not plague, not the sea, and not raiders, what else could erase a village? Far from Scandinavia, across the globe, a colossal eruption may have played its part. Around the mid-6th century, a volcanic event of unimaginable scale darkened the skies of Europe. Though the volcano itself was thousands of miles away, possibly in Iceland, Central America, or even Indonesia, its impact was felt everywhere. Ash and sulfur filled the atmosphere, blotting out the sun for months at a time. The days grew dim, the nights bitterly cold. Crops withered in the fields, and rivers froze at unusual times of year. Some historians call it the year without summer. The written accounts from other regions are chilling. Chroniclers in Constantinople spoke of the sun shining without warmth, its light pale and ghostly. Records from Ireland and China describe crop failures, famine, and desperate migrations. Even tree rings from this period tell the same story. Growth halted, forests stood still, and nature itself seemed to recoil from the sky's shadow. Could the Spanish Viking village have been one of its casualties? In a world already balanced on the edge of survival, a sudden plunge into cold and hunger would have been catastrophic. With no food to harvest, no sunlight to guide their planting, and bitter winds cutting deeper each winter, life would have become unbearable. Families huddled around dim fires may have watched their children weaken, their livestock perish, and their fields turn to wasteland. It is not hard to imagine the moment they decided to leave. Perhaps the entire community gathered in the village center, weighing whether to endure another starving winter or take their chances elsewhere. With little more than what they could carry, they may have abandoned their homes together, migrating in search of warmth, safety, and survival. Their departure may not have been sudden, but it was absolute, leaving behind a village frozen in silence. But even with famine, plague, sea, and ash, something doesn't add up. Archaeologists studying the site noticed something strange. The tools, the pottery, the belongings were left behind neatly, not scattered, not broken, not tossed aside in chaos or haste. Instead, they were arranged as though carefully placed, as if the villagers walked away willingly, leaving their possessions in quiet order. Cooking pots still rested by the hearths, as though awaiting the next meal. Farming tools leaned against the walls of abandoned longhouses. Clay vessels remained unshattered, and personal ornaments, beads, combs, and small carvings were untouched. These are not the signs of a people fleeing terror, but of a community that prepared intentionally to leave almost everything behind. This has led to one of the most unsettling theories, that the village staged a complete deliberate departure. But why? Was it a collective decision guided by necessity? Or something deeper, perhaps a ritual act, a symbolic abandonment of a cursed place? In Viking culture, omens and spiritual signs carried immense weight. If the land itself was believed to be cursed, poisoned, or claimed by restless spirits, a community might feel compelled to leave everything as it was, as if sealing the settlement in silence. Another possibility is migration. Entire families may have chosen to move together, joining stronger clans or searching for more fertile ground. If so, they may have left deliberately light, carrying only what was essential for the long journey ahead. To the archaeologists, it looks like abandonment, but to the villagers, it may have been survival. And yet, no record of their arrival elsewhere has ever been found. No saga, no carving, no trace in neighboring lands tells the story of their fate. It is as though they stepped away from history itself, vanishing not in panic, but in eerie, deliberate silence. But what if it wasn't famine, plague, sea, or migration at all? What if the truth lies not in science, but in the legends that haunted their world? In local folklore, stories speak of spirits and curses haunting certain lands. Long after the Vikings were gone, whispers lingered about places where no one dared to settle again. Fields that would not grow crops, waters that swallowed ships, and valleys where strange sounds echoed in the night. Could this village have been one of those places? Could its people have abandoned their homes not because of famine or war, but because they believed they were no longer welcome there? The Vikings lived in a world where the natural and the supernatural often blurred. For them, the unseen was as real as the soil beneath their feet. They told of Draugr, the restless dead who returned to torment the living. They feared the anger of land spirits, who could curse entire settlements if offended. Even a sudden storm or the death of livestock might be taken as an omen that the gods had turned away their favor. It is not impossible to imagine the villagers interpreting misfortune as a sign of doom. If a child fell ill without explanation, if the harvest failed despite their efforts, or if strange lights flickered in the northern skies, these could all be read as warnings. In such a world, fear itself could drive the people to leave everything behind, convinced that to remain was to invite destruction. While legends can't be proven, they sometimes preserve echoes of real fear. Folklore may not tell us what truly happened, but it reflects how people understood their world, and how they reacted to forces they could not explain. Perhaps this vanished village lives on, not in records or ruins, but in the stories passed down, twisted and reshaped over centuries, into tales of curses and haunted ground. But here's where the mystery deepens further, because even the legends fail to explain why no trace of the people themselves was ever found. After decades of research, many experts now point to climate collapse as the strongest explanation. Evidence of worsening winters, shrinking harvests, and freezing seas paints a clear picture. Survival would have demanded drastic action. Families may have scattered to neighboring villages, joined other clans, or sought refuge further south. Over time, their story vanished, just like their homes, swallowed not by the sea or fire, but by silence and time. The disappearance wasn't sudden at all, but gradual. A slow unraveling until nothing remained but ruins. One day thriving, the next gone forever. The mystery of the vanished Viking village remains unsolved, but its silence speaks louder than any legend. Have you ever heard of an island that appears only when the sea itself chooses to reveal it? Off the storm-battered coasts of Norway, hidden among cold fogs and crashing tides, Viking sagas speak of a place unlike any other. A drifting isle, a phantom land. It rose from the waves, only to vanish before sailors could set foot upon its shore. This place was called Gunmar's Skerries, an island that, according to legend, was cursed, haunted, and drenched in the blood of betrayal. Sailors whispered that it guarded treasures buried in its rocks, yet also the restless dead who defended them. But the question has tormented seafarers for over 1,000 years. Was Gunmar's Skerries a real island swallowed by the sea? Or was it a mirage, conjured by ancient gods to test those who dared sail too far into the North Atlantic? If Gunmar's Isle was only a myth, then why did so many Viking navigators record its exact position on their sea maps? The tale begins with Gunmar himself. In the old stories, Gunmar was no ordinary Viking. He was a warlord of fearsome reputation, a man said to command storms as easily as he commanded men. Yet his ambition outgrew his loyalty. In the heat of battle, he betrayed his own kin, seizing their ships and striking down his blood brothers in his lust for power. According to the sagas, the gods would not let such treachery stand. Odin himself cursed Gunmar to wander the seas without rest, his soul chained to the waters that had once carried his victories. His fleet, broken upon a cluster of jagged rocks, was said to have sunk beneath the tide. Those rocks, sometimes visible, sometimes gone, were called Gunmar's Skerries. From then on, sailors told of strange happenings near those waters. Fishermen swore they saw ghostly lights dancing over the waves at night. Navigators heard the clash of unseen oars, the sound of longships rowing through fog, though nothing was visible. Some even claimed they heard voices, familiar voices whispering their names from across the water. For centuries, the island seemed to drift. Some swore they saw it clearly in the daylight, a shore lined with pale sand and cliffs glinting like iron. Yet, When they steered their ships toward it, the island dissolved into mist, as though it had never been there at all. Could shifting sandbars, volcanic activity, or hidden reefs explain these illusions? Or was this the work of something more unearthly? An island that was both fair and not, suspended between worlds? If it was only a trick of the sea, then who or what was calling sailors by name from the fog? The legends of Gunmar's Skerries grew darker with each retelling. Norse poems speak of warriors lured by phantom fires. They followed glowing torches into the night, certain they were approaching the campfires of raiders, or perhaps even safe harbor. Instead, they vanished. Ships sailed in. None sailed out. It was said that the crews who reached the Phantom Isle never found gold, only a shore littered with broken shields and rusting swords. Those who touched the weapons were never seen again, claimed by Gunmar's ghostly army. Some tales insisted these warriors were bound into his fleet of the dead, cursed to raid forever on spectral ships that cut through both sea and mist. What makes these stories so haunting is that they refuse to fade with time. Centuries after the Viking Age ended, Gunmar's Skerries still appeared on maps. Medieval cartographers marked its cliffs as if they were real and solid. Some even noted warnings in the margins. Beware the voices on the wind, beware the lights that lead astray. Why would educated mapmakers of the Middle Ages draw such a place unless there were reports they considered credible? Were these mariners chasing superstition, or recording evidence of something lost but real? If Gunmar's Skerries was pure legend, why did explorers hundreds of years later keep searching for it? The search for Gunmar's Skerries did not die with the sagas. In the 16th and 17th centuries, as exploration expanded across the northern seas, sailors from Denmark, Scotland, and Norway launched expeditions to find the Phantom Isle. Some returned with claims of discovery. They spoke of towering cliffs, black as iron, rising suddenly from the fog. They described hearing horns in the night, the sound of shields clashing in unseen battles. Others came back half-mad, warning that they had sailed directly toward the island, only for it to vanish before their eyes. One account from a Scottish captain in the 1600s describes land so close I could smell the earth, yet it melted away like smoke when I reached out to touch it. Another Danish report spoke of sea monsters circling near the island's supposed location, as if guarding whatever lay beneath. Even modern science has stumbled across hints of something unusual in these waters. Sonar scans in the Norwegian Sea have revealed strange underwater ridges and formations, shaped uncannily like the spine of an island that once existed. Could Gunmar's Skerries have been swallowed by the ocean, its rocks broken down by centuries of waves, leaving only whispers of its presence behind? If so, then the Vikings may have been right all along. There was once land there. And if the sagas are to be believed, that land was cursed. And if the island truly sank, what secrets still lie hidden beneath the dark waters? Today, Gunmar's Skerries lingers as one of the great unsolved mysteries of Viking lore. To believers, it is proof that the old gods still hold sway, guarding their secrets beneath the sea. To skeptics, it is a mixture of mirages, shifting tides, and the human tendency to weave myth into the unexplained. But one fact is undeniable. The story has endured. From the earliest Viking raiders to the cartographers of the Middle Ages, to modern sailors who still whisper about phantom lights in the fog, Gunmar's Isle refuses to be forgotten. Some say it was swallowed by the sea as punishment, dragged beneath the waves by the gods themselves. Others claim it still drifts across the horizon, appearing only to those doomed never to return. A few even believe it will rise again, when the world nears its end, carrying Gunmar's ghost fleet to raid once more. And so the question remains, echoing across the centuries: was Gunmar's Isle ever truly there, waiting just beyond reach? Or is it still out there even now, appearing only to those who dare sail too far, answering the phantom call of the Skerries? In the late 10th century, led by the fiery outlaw Eric the Red, Norse settlers crossed the storm-lashed North Atlantic to Greenland. To many, the journey was madness, an attempt to carve a life out of a land locked in ice. Yet the Vikings were no strangers to risk. They had sailed to Iceland, raided the coasts of Britain, and even reached the shores of North America. Greenland was simply the next frontier. They built farms along the narrow fjords, where thin strips of grass clung stubbornly to the rocky earth. They raised cattle, sheep, and goats, their herds grazing in summer pastures, while families gathered hay to last the brutal winters. They hunted seals and walrus on the ice, their skill at navigating the frozen seas unmatched. And they built not only homes, but churches of stone, symbols of faith and permanence in a land where survival was never guaranteed. For nearly 500 years, these colonies endured. They were Europe's farthest outpost, a fragile lifeline across the Atlantic. Ships carried walrus ivory, polar bear pelts, and rare goods back to Norway and beyond, and in return came iron, grain, and luxuries that Greenland could never produce. The Norse of Greenland were both farmers and traders, living on the edge of two worlds, the Arctic wilderness and the medieval Norse kingdom they still considered home. At their height, as many as 5,000 people may have lived in the eastern and western settlements. They built halls, farms, and churches that rivaled those of Iceland. Weddings were celebrated, children were born, and generations passed in this frozen colony. For a time, it seemed as though the Vikings had conquered even this harsh frontier, bending it to their will. But by the 1400s, travelers from Europe reported an eerie truth. The colonies had vanished. What could erase an entire people? One of the strongest theories is climate collapse. Around the 14th century, the world entered what historians now call the Little Ice Age. Across Europe and the North Atlantic, winters grew longer, summers shorter, and storms more violent. For the Norse in Greenland, this shift was devastating. Their survival depended on a delicate balance. Short summers to grow hay for their animals, mild winters to keep herds alive, and open seas to maintain contact with the outside world. But the balance collapsed. Sea ice spread farther south, choking the coasts and blocking trade routes. Bitter winds swept across the fjords, freezing waters that had once carried fishing boats. The already fragile farmland, thin soil perched on permafrost, grew colder and less fertile with each passing year. Grasslands that once supported cattle shrank to frozen wastelands. What little hay could be harvested was never enough to feed the herds through endless winters. Cattle starved, sheep and goats followed. Farmers who once prided themselves on raising livestock were forced to slaughter animals early, preserving what meat they could in desperate bids for survival. Some abandoned cattle altogether, keeping only smaller, hardier goats, creatures that could scrape a living from frost-hardened grass. But even they began to dwindle. Archaeological digs confirm this decline. Bones of Norse settlers show signs of stunted growth, brittle from years of poor nutrition. Livestock remained shrink in size over the centuries, reflecting herds weakened by hunger and poor breeding conditions. Even the soil itself, when tested, reveals signs of erosion and overuse, as settlers clung to their land long after it had sustaining them. When the land could no longer sustain them, many believe the settlers abandoned Greenland entirely. Families may have packed what little they had left, boarded their longships, and vanished into the sea, seeking refuge in Iceland, Norway, or perhaps even across the Western Ocean. Their farms were left to the snow, their churches to crumble in silence, until all that remained was ruin. But if they left, where did they go? Another theory is isolation. The Greenland colonies relied heavily on trade with Europe. From the icy seas, they hunted walrus, harvesting not only meat and hides, but ivory tusks prized in Europe for luxury goods and religious carvings. They also traded furs and animal skins, bartering for iron, timber, cloth, and green. Materials impossible to produce in Greenland's frozen soil. For centuries, this fragile trade network kept the colony alive. But in the 14th century, the value of walrus ivory collapsed. As news sources of elephant ivory from Africa became more accessible to European markets, the Greenlanders' monopoly lost its worth. With no ivory to tempt merchants, fewer ships sailed to the colony's distant shores. Slowly, the flow of goods and news from the outside world dwindled. What had once been a lifeline became a vanishing thread. Without trade, iron tools grew dull and unrepairable. Timber for shipbuilding, once imported from Norway, became scarce. Clothing wore thin, patched and repatched until nothing remained. Even the most basic necessities became treasures. A pair of shears, a piece of iron, a bolt of cloth. Objects so common in Europe became priceless in Greenland's growing isolation. Imagine the silence. Year after year, the horizon empty. No sails breaking the waves, no messengers bringing news of the world beyond. No word from kin in Iceland or Norway, no priests or merchants arriving with supplies. For the Greenland Norse, this silence must have been suffocating. They were a people cut off, watching the sea each season, waiting for ships that never came. As winters lengthened and stores ran low, the colony may have withered. Families scattered, perhaps trying to find refuge among neighbors or across the sea, while others perished in their homes. Without contact, their disappearance was not even noticed until centuries later, when travelers rediscovered ruins where vibrant communities had once stood. But some believe the end was not just about silence, it was about conflict. Greenland was not uninhabited. To the north and west lived the Inuit, masterful hunters who thrived where the Norse struggled. The Inuit had perfected the art of survival in the Arctic, building skin boats that could glide over both sea and ice, crafting harpoons for seals and whales, and developing clothing so warm it baffled Europeans centuries later. To them, the frozen wilderness was not an enemy but a partner in survival. Evidence shows contact between the Norse and the Inuit, sometimes peaceful, sometimes violent. Inuit artifacts appear in Norse ruins, and Norse objects have been found among Inuit settlements, proof of exchange and interaction. But was this trade born of friendship or desperation? As resources grew scarcer in the 14th and 15th centuries, competition between the two peoples may have flared into conflict. Seals, once abundant, were lifelines for both groups. In a world where every fish, every whale, every patch of grass mattered, survival often came at the expense of one's neighbor. Did rising competition for dwindling resources spark battles along the fjords? Could Inuit hunters, better adapted to the Arctic, have gradually displaced the Norse? Some archaeologists point to Inuit arrowheads found in Norse sites, suggesting moments of violence. Others see signs of peaceful cohabitation, even intermarriage, as the two peoples learned from one another. The sagas, too, speak of contact. Norse texts describe encounters with Skerries, a term they used for the indigenous peoples of Greenland and beyond. These stories often portray the Skerries as both trading partners and adversaries, with skirmishes erupting over land and goods. Yet sagas also exaggerate, blurring the line between history and legend. Were these small clashes the seeds of the Norse downfall, or only fragments of memory passed down and distorted? Some researchers believe the Greenlanders may not have been wiped out by war at all, but instead absorbed into Inuit society. Cut off from Europe and abandoned by their own kin, the Norse may have slowly adopted Inuit ways, finding in their neighbors the knowledge and resilience they lacked. If so, their bloodline may still live on in Greenland today, even if their culture and language disappeared into history. But there's another possibility, one of faith, desperation, and a final voyage into the unknown. Some accounts suggest the Greenland Norse may have gathered their strength for one last journey. Facing starvation, cut off from Europe, and unable to farm the barren land, they may have decided that remaining in Greenland meant certain death. So perhaps they abandoned their homesteads and churches, loaded their families and livestock onto longships, and set their eyes on distant shores. But the question remains, did they sail east, back to the familiar safety of Iceland and Norway? Or did they turn west into the unknown? To sail east was to gamble on a long journey against storms and drifting ice. If their ships survived, they might have returned to Icelandic kin or the Norwegian crown, carrying with them stories of collapse and hardship. Yet no records from those lands mention the sudden arrival of hundreds of starving Greenlanders. The silence suggests they never made it, or if they did, their arrival left no lasting trace. To sail west was even bolder. Norse sagas speak of a land across the sea they called Vinland, a place of forests, wild grapes, and fertile soil. We now know this land was North America. Archaeological remains at El Ants Meadows in Newfoundland prove that Vikings had reached these shores centuries before the fall of Greenland. Could the last Norse settlers have placed their final hope in that distant land, seeking refuge far beyond Europe's reach? The idea is tantalizing but troubling. If they did sail west, no colony endured. No ruins mark their survival, no saga tells their fate. Perhaps they found the coastlines too hostile, or met resistance from indigenous peoples who guarded their lands fiercely. Perhaps storms shattered their ships against unknown shores, or perhaps they did reach Finland, only to perish slowly, their memory absorbed into legend until nothing remained but whispers. And so the last voyage of the Greenland Norse remains a ghost story of the sea. Did they set sail with hope burning in their hearts, believing they could outrun famine and ice? Or were they swallowed by the Atlantic, their ships vanishing into the gray horizon, their voices lost beneath the roar of waves? But still, the question lingers, why did no one return? The most haunting evidence comes not from legends, but from the ground itself. Excavations at Herjolfsens, one of the last Greenland settlements, revealed something unexpected. Graves of men, women, and children laid carefully to rest. Their bodies were wrapped in fine medieval clothing, woolen hoods, cloaks, and gowns, many so well preserved by the permafrost that stitches could still be seen centuries later. These garments tell us that even at the end, the Greenland Norse clung to European traditions, to dignity, and to faith. What is striking, however, is what these graves do not show. The bodies bear no evidence of massacre, no shattered bones, no signs of sudden violence. They were not dumped in haste, but buried with care. And while signs of malnutrition are present in bones from earlier sites, these burials suggest that starvation was not the final blow. Their deaths seem almost ordinary, as if the colony did not collapse in a single catastrophic event, but instead faded slowly, almost imperceptibly. Archaeologists believe these burials mark the final chapter of the Greenland Norse. Family by family, generation by generation, the community dwindled. Some may have died from illness, others from hunger during the harsh winters. Still others may have left Greenland altogether, their fates lost to the sea. In the end, the last survivors buried their kin as best they could, then carried on until they too were gone. Perhaps the final farmstead stood in eerie silence, its walls battered by wind, its hearths cold and dark. Perhaps the last family watched the sea from their doorway, waiting for ships that would never return. And when their time came, no one remained to bury them, no one remained to tell their story. The colony simply slipped into silence until all that was left were empty houses, forgotten churches, and graves preserved in the frozen earth. This is the most haunting truth of all. The Greenland Norse may not have vanished in fire or fury, but in quiet surrender until history forgot them. For nearly 5 centuries, the Norse clung to life on the edge of the Arctic, and then they were gone. Famine, climate change, isolation, conflict, migration. Each theory tells part of the tale, but the truth may be all of them at once, a slow unraveling of a society until history forgot them. They came to Greenland seeking a new world, but when the ice closed in, no one returned. What if a trail could vanish? Not because of storms or time, but because it was never meant to be found again. In the heart of Iceland's untamed highlands, there once lay a path carved into volcanic stone. It guided shepherds, merchants, and wanderers through some of the most unforgiving landscapes on Earth. Yet, somewhere along its course, the footprints ended. Suddenly, inexplicably, no fading tracks, no gradual erosion. Just silence, as though the land itself refused to remember the road. Travelers spoke of unease when they reached this place. Horses shied, refusing to move forward. Flocks scattered as if spooked by something unseen. And in the thick fogs that rolled down from glacial valleys, wanderers claimed to hear whispers, guiding, warning, or luring them deeper. Centuries later, the trail remains a phantom. Modern explorers trace parts of it, but the same question echoes. Why did this ancient route disappear? Was it claimed by the elements, buried by volcanic fury? Or was there something darker? Something Iceland's legends knew but dared not speak too loudly. This is the story of Iceland's forgotten trail. A place where history, folklore, and geology collide. A place where footsteps still echo, but no longer lead anywhere. During the Viking Age, Iceland was more than a rugged island. It was a frontier of survival. Harsh winters, restless volcanoes, and vast highlands forced its settlers to carve paths between farms, fishing grounds, and grazing lands. Trails were lifelines, marked by stone cairns and kept alive by centuries of footsteps. One such path wound through the remote central highlands, crossing moss plains and black deserts of lava. Known only in scattered accounts, it linked farms along the coast with interior grazing grounds. Shepherds drove their sheep across it, merchants carried goods, and travelers dared to cross its silence. To Vikings who saw the land as alive with spirits, such routes were not mere roads. They were thresholds, liminal spaces where human presence clashed with wild, untamed nature. In sagas, trails were often places of fate. Heroes vanished in storms, wanderers met beings from folklore, and outlaws hid in the wilderness beyond the known way. The highlands were both a highway and a boundary, where the civilized world ended and the unknown began. It was in this atmosphere of survival and superstition that the mystery of the forgotten trail began. For even the most practical Viking traveler knew, when a path suddenly disappears, it may not be by accident. The story begins simply, a well-traveled trail that ended without warning. Those who followed it came to a plain where the ground was firm, yet no further tracks could be found. The prints of men and beasts simply stopped. Travelers told of strange sensations. Some felt the air grow heavy as though stepping into another world. Others claimed their vision blurred, horizons shifted, or distances became warped. One moment they were certain of the way ahead, then suddenly the path was gone. Even more unsettling was the silence. Iceland's highlands are rarely still. Winds sweep across valleys, glaciers groan in the distance, rivers thunder through canyons. Yet at this place, the world seemed muted. Footsteps echoed strangely, horses balked, and when fog rolled in, some claimed to see shadowy figures at the edge of their vision, always watching, never approaching. What frightened travelers most was not what they saw, but what they didn't. No cairns to mark the way, no hoofprints in the earth, no remnants of those who had passed before. As if the land itself consumed all traces of passage. Here was a path not simply forgotten, but one that seemed determined to erase its own existence. Was it nature or something more? The people of Iceland, steeped in sagas and superstition, crafted stories to explain the vanished way. For them, the highlands were not empty wilderness, but a realm alive with hidden forces. Some believed the Halfa folk, the hidden people of Icelandic folklore, had claimed the land. Said to dwell in rocks, hills, and lava fields, these unseen beings punished trespassers with misfortune. The sudden end of the trail, locals whispered, was no accident. It was a barrier erected by the hidden folk themselves, a warning to mortals not to go further. Travelers who ignored the signs told eerie tales. Some heard stones shifting as though footsteps followed them, though no one was there. Others claimed their packs grew heavier, their limbs weaker, as if unseen hands weighed them down. To the faithful, these were not coincidences, but the hidden people enforcing their boundary. Yet not all explanations were supernatural. Others spoke of outlaws. For centuries, criminals banished from society roamed the highlands, living as ghosts among lava and ash. Perhaps they obscured the trail deliberately, confusing pursuers and trapping wanderers. Cairns marking the way could have been toppled, tracks erased. A false road created, leading strangers to their deaths by cold, hunger, or worse. But the strangest legend was of the swallowing ground, a cursed plain where no mark could last. Shepherds claimed that even sheep tracks vanished overnight. The soil, they said, devoured footprints as fast as they were made. Campfires left no ash, hooves left no dent. To linger too long was to invite disappearance, not just of one's path, but of oneself. For generations, parents warned children, never wander too far from the known ways. For in Iceland, it was said, some roads lead not to places, but to vanishings. But what kind of force could erase not just the path, but the travelers themselves? Archaeologists and historians have long searched for physical evidence of the forgotten trail. Ancient Icelandic maps, when they mention it at all, show only faint and broken lines stretching across the highlands, cutting off suddenly into blank space. Unlike the great trade routes of Europe, no detailed description of this path survives in written records. It exists only in fragments, as if cartographers themselves were reluctant to commit its course to memory. In the field, researchers discovered scattered cairns, stone piles once built to guide travelers through Iceland's wild interior. Along known trails, these markers march steadily across the land, reliable and precise. Yet in the region of the vanished path, cairns appear only in clusters. They lead partway, then stop as if the builders abandoned the task mid-journey. Some lie toppled, their stones scattered unnaturally, hinting that they were dismantled by human hands rather than time. Soil studies provide clues, but no resolution. The ground here is layered with volcanic ash, porous lava, and shifting sands. Footprints sink but leave no lasting mark. Wind and frost can erase impressions within hours. Even so, the speed at which traces vanish seems extraordinary. Other trails of the same age endure, their marks carved deep into stone. Why should this one alone resist preservation? Artifacts are rare. No tools, no coins, no remnants of fire pits or campsites. Just silence, an emptiness that speaks louder than discovery. For archaeologists, the absence is as telling as the evidence itself. If people traveled here for generations, why does the land refuse to remember them? And could it be that what archaeologists seek is not missing at all but hidden? Modern researchers suggest natural forces may explain the mystery. Iceland's highlands are among the most unstable landscapes on Earth. Lava fields shift with every eruption, glaciers creep across valleys, and sudden ash storms can bury entire routes in hours. Perhaps the missing trail lies beneath hardened magma, or was wiped clean by floods unleashed when glaciers melted. In such a restless land, roads vanish quickly, swallowed by nature's endless reshaping. Others focus on the soil itself. Loose volcanic sand and porous stone create ground unlike anywhere else. Footprints pressed into the surface at dawn can vanish before nightfall. Wagon tracks dissolve in days. To the eye of an early traveler, this strange erasure would appear almost magical. In a world ruled by superstition, it is no wonder they believed the land itself conspired to hide their way. Magnetic anomalies present another possibility. Iceland sits directly atop the mid-Atlantic rift, where tectonic forces split the Earth. Such geology produces unpredictable magnetic fields. Compasses spin without warning, horizons appear distorted, and distances shift in the mind's eye. Many hikers today still describe a sense of disorientation in certain regions, as if the ground tilts beneath them or unseen forces push them off course. Could ancient travelers, without instruments, have felt the same uncanny resistance? And yet, despite science offering explanations, folklore refuses to fade. For geology can explain how trails vanish, but not why travelers reported feeling watched, or why their stories remain so hauntingly consistent across centuries. If natural forces alone were responsible, why does this one path inspire fear while others endure as mere obstacles? Could it be that the land itself holds a secret science cannot yet name? The Forgotten Trail of Iceland is more than a vanished road. It is a boundary between worlds, between what can be mapped and what resists being known, between the footsteps we leave behind and the ones the earth chooses to erase. Perhaps the path was claimed by restless geology, erased by lava and ash. Perhaps it was the hidden people, jealously guarding their domain. Or perhaps it was something deeper, an ancient warning written not in ink, but in silence. For some mysteries are not meant to be solved. Some roads are not meant to be found again. And so, where the footprints ended, the truth may never return. Beneath the crashing waves of the North Atlantic lies one of history's most haunting mysteries. Over 1,000 years ago, Viking explorers braved the unknown in longships crowned with dragon heads, sailing further than most dared to imagine. They carved their mark on frozen seas and distant shores, driven by hunger, ambition, and the promise of discovery. Their sagas told of strange new lands, places of towering cliffs, endless forests, and wild abundance. Among them was a place called Markland, a land rich with timber, a lifeline for settlers in Greenland where wood was scarce. To the Vikings, Markland was not a rumor. It was real, a land they reached, used, and returned from. And yet, it vanished. Markland was whispered in sagas, its name etched into the chronicles of Iceland, but then it disappeared from both history and memory. No ruins were left behind, no graves to tell of those who lived there, no artifacts buried beneath the soil. Just a word, carried through the centuries like a ghost on the wind. What was Markland? Was it a colony, a seasonal outpost, or something more? Why did a land so valuable simply fade away? And most haunting of all, could its remains still be out there, hidden beneath the forests of North America, waiting to be found? The Viking Age stretched from the late 8th century to the mid-11th century, a time of daring voyages, shifting kingdoms, and restless ambition. From the icy fjords of Norway to the windswept plains of Iceland, Norse seafarers were not only raiders, but explorers. With skillful navigation and unmatched shipbuilding, they pushed further westward than any Europeans before them. By the end of the 10th century, Greenland had been settled, a fragile colony clinging to survival on the edge of the known world. Life there was harsh, the land unyielding, the winters long and merciless, but the Greenlanders were not cut off. Their sagas spoke of distant shores across the western seas, lands rich in resources that their own could not provide. These new territories were named in their stories: Helgeland, the land of flat stones; Vinland, the land of wild grapes; and Markland, the land of forests. Markland, described as heavily wooded, offered something Greenland lacked: timber. To a society that depended on driftwood for survival, the prospect of endless forests was priceless. Ships, houses, tools. Wood meant life itself. For Greenland's colonists, Markland was no myth, but a practical necessity. They voyaged there for lumber, harvesting what their frozen homeland could not give them. And yet, beyond scattered mentions in the sagas and a single Icelandic annal entry from 1347, Markland fades into silence. No maps preserve its outline. No ruins confirm its place. It hovers at the edge of Viking memory, like a dream that vanished at dawn. Why would a land so useful, so vital, vanish from both history and map? What secret does Markland hide in its silence? The sagas tell us that Markland was real. It was seen. It was used. Viking longships cut across the waves to reach its shores, returning with timber from forests Greenland could never provide. To them, this was not a rumor, not a myth, but a lifeline carved from a distant land. And yet, unlike Vinland, Markland left no footprint. No hearthstones buried beneath the soil. No iron nails resting in the earth. No ship timbers weathered by centuries of silence. It existed in the written word and a memory alone, never in the ground. The last time Markland is named is in the year 1347. An Icelandic record describes a ship blown off course, drifting from Greenland, its voyage beginning in Markland. That single line is the last breath of a place once vital to survival. After that silence, the name falls from the sagas. The voyages stop, the forests are left untouched. How could a land so real, so necessary, vanish so completely? Was it a settlement swallowed by time, its ruins hidden beneath centuries of wilderness? Was it conflict, a clash that ended in disappearance? Or did the land itself, Markland, the land of forests, refuse to be held? A place that should be visible in history is instead erased, a ghost drawn only in words. Why did it vanish? And who or what erased it? As Markland slipped from memory, it transformed into legend. Seafarers whispered that the land itself was cursed, a place where crews vanished into endless forests and never returned. Some said the trees were guardians, ancient spirits watching the shorelines, ensuring that no outsider could ever claim the land for long. To step into Markland, they believed, was to step into the unknown, and to be lost to it. In other tales, Markland was more than land. It was a threshold, a border between the world of men and something beyond reach. For the Norse, who spoke of gods walking the earth and realms overlapping, it was easy to imagine Markland as a place where the veil was thin. Among Inuit traditions, there are echoes of pale-skinned strangers arriving from the sea. They built shelters. They walked the forests. Then, as suddenly as they appeared, they were gone. Some say they returned to the sea. Others claim they were swallowed by the land itself, and so Markland became a ghost. A place both real and not, remembered and forgotten. A name in the sagas, a whisper in folklore, a shadow on the map. But if stories linger, does it mean there was truth buried within them? Or were these legends born only to explain a silence too deep to accept? Unlike Vinland, where the ruins of Lonso Meadows confirm Viking presence beyond doubt, Markland leaves nothing behind. No foundations buried in the earth, no fire-blackened hearthstones, no rusting nails or broken tools left to crumble with time, no graves to whisper the names of those who might have lived and died there. It is as though Markland was touched by human hands, yet left no fingerprint at all. The only concrete mention comes not from the ground, but from ink on parchment. An Icelandic annal from 1347 describes a ship blown off course, sailing from Greenland by way of Markland. That single line stands as the last trace of a mysterious shore. After centuries of voyages, the records fall silent. The name disappears. Markland drifts into shadow. Archaeologists have searched along the coast of Labrador, across Newfoundland, deep into the interior forests. They have uncovered evidence of indigenous peoples whose presence predates the Vikings, tools of stone and bone, traces of camps, fragments of lives preserved in soil. But of Markland, nothing. Not a single unmistakable sign that the Norse ever built, lived, or died there. Some argue that Markland was never settled, only visited for timber and abandoned before anything permanent was left. Others whisper that the wilderness may still hide what archaeologists have not yet found. Ruins buried under centuries of roots and moss, waiting in silence. If the Vikings truly left no trace, then what does that mean for Markland's story? Was it always a phantom land? Or is its evidence still out there, concealed beneath the forests, waiting to be unearthed? Historians and archaeologists have struggled to explain the silence of Markland. Some argue it was never a true colony, but only a resource stop. An outpost where Viking crews cut timber, filled their ships, and returned to Greenland without leaving permanent traces. If so, then perhaps there was nothing to find, no settlement to endure, no ruins to be uncovered. Others believe conflict may have shaped its fate. Encounters between Norse settlers and indigenous peoples could have turned violent, leaving behind a story too painful or humiliating for the sagas to record. In Viking culture, defeats were rarely celebrated. They were quietly forgotten. Could Markland's disappearance be less a mystery and more a silence born of shame? Climate, too, is a suspect. As the Little Ice Age descended on the North Atlantic, the seas grew colder, harsher, more dangerous. For Greenland's fragile colony, survival itself became a struggle. Perhaps the distance to Markland, once a vital lifeline, became a risk not worth taking. The voyages dwindled, then stopped. And yet questions linger. Could Markland still exist under another name, its ruins buried deep within Canada's wilderness? Could entire sites remain untouched beneath centuries of moss and root, waiting for the right storm or careful excavation to reveal them? Or was Markland less a place and more an idea? A symbol of abundance that lived on in memory long after the land itself was lost? If Markland was only a timber station, why does it loom so large in saga and legend? Why does it endure in whispers and speculation when so many other Viking tales have already found their proof? Markland stands as one of history's great vanishing acts. A land once real, once named, once vital, and then erased. Its forests may still rise along the northern coastlines. Its stones may still hold the echo of forgotten footsteps. But no voice remains to tell its story. It lingers only as a shadow, part history, part legend, part silence. A colony that may have existed or may have been lost before it even began. And so the mystery endures, unanswered, unresolved, unfinished.